Hello everybody and welcome to lesson number 1. In this session we're going to get all the components cut to size and I'm going to show you a foolproof way of marking everything out. Alright, so I've got the material laid out here in front of me. We've got some slightly thicker material which is going to make up the lid. We've got some thinner material in 2 different widths which is going to make up the box itself. And we've got these 2 smaller sections here which are going to make up the plinth. Now for the moment we're only going to focus on the actual box, so we'll put the lid and the plinth component to the side and we'll just focus on the actual box. Now we're going to need a crosscut saw for this. Ideally you could get away with using a rip saw to cut these components to size by cutting across the grain, but a crosscut saw is going to give you a much better finish and it's going to be a cleaner cut when you use this as opposed to a rip saw. I've put a few recommendations in the tool list, so if you haven't downloaded that already, make sure you do so. There's a few suggestions to suit various budgets in there as well. Now to cut these components to size, what we'll be using is this thing. It's called a bench hook. It's nothing more than a bit of flat material such as plywood or MDF or even wood if you fancy it, with a hook on the bottom and some sort of fence on the back. And this allows it to sit up against the side of a bench. You put the material on it and then you can cut to size using the back as a brace. And what I will say at this point is there's going to be a little bit of a mantra throughout this series and in all the subsequent series that follow this. And that is with regards to sizing and marking out timber, because so many people, pardon the pun, saw through this part of the project, and because they just want to get stuck in with the nitty-gritty stuff. They want to make dovetails, they want to glue stuff, they want to actually make the project, and as a result they rush the sizing, they rush the marking out, and what that does is, doesn't matter how accurate you are with a saw or with a chisel, if you're working to inaccurate lines then your work is going to be inaccurate. Make sure to take the time sizing and marking out the material. If anything, spend more time on this than doing the actual cutting, because it is the foundation of all the work that follows. So here I've got the wider part of the box, which is going to make up the short sides. And what I'm going to feel for is just make sure there's no planer snipe on this from when it was machined, which would be sort of a little scoop out the end of the timber, which is a result of it dropping off the infeed bed when planing or spring back when thicknessing. There's all sorts of problems. So just sort of feel the last 200 millimeters of the end and see if you can feel any steps. That all seems to be okay. So what I'm going to do is square a line across the edge of this and cut off all that minging end grain that's been left over from the edge of the rough sawn board. So I get the crosscut saw nice and tight into the edge of the bench hook so we get maximum support, and then I'm going to use some of the tips that I shared in my video how to saw correctly, starting at the back edge, lower the saw. So there we go. Now the top line is established and we can just focus on cutting plumb. And that's left us with a nice square edge. However, it is still somewhat rough sawn. This has given us a clean finish, but we're going to clean it up with a plane on a shooting board in a bit. So what I'm going to do is cut this component off, but I'm going to cut it about 1 millimeter or 2 longer at this point, so that then I have a little bit of material to plane down afterwards. So we'll square that line across, and then importantly, make sure to mark the waist side of it with a little cross so that I know which side of the line I need to cut. So saw's going right up against that. We're going to leave a little bit of a line remaining. There you go, top established. Now let's just cut plumb again. There you go, one component separated, about 2 millimeters oversized roughly, so then we've got a little bit to shoot down afterwards. And then I'll just rub off that little cross mark so as not to confuse myself later on, so it doesn't take much. And then we'll mark out the second component. Once again, 2 millimeters oversized roughly, mark the waist side and then cut that out. All right, and there's the 2 short sides complete. Now we'll do exactly the same for the longer sides. Square a line across the end grain, cut it square, lay out the next component, a couple of millimeters oversized, and mark the waist side with a small cross. Square that across and then cut it on the waist side of that line. Okay, so that's us done with the bench hook. At this point, it's really important to get our face sides and our face edges established. Now, the face side and face edge is simply a way of keeping track of all of these different components and their orientation to one another, because when making a box, it's incredibly easy to, instead of make this, you make this, where you dovetail a component the wrong way because your face sides and your face edges haven't been marked out and you've overlooked a stage of the marking out process. So a face side and a face edge mark is usually drawn with a kind of swish on the face and then a little kind of tick thing on the edge of the component. Now, when you do this, you want the face sides to be on the outside of the box and you want the face edges to be on the bottom of the box, because the top is not going to be flush once it's all assembled at the end. It's good practice to make the face sides and the face edges an area that is going to be flush once the thing is assembled. So in this case, outside edges are going to create a nice 90-degree corner and the bottoms are going to be flush with one another. So to do this, what I'm going to do firstly is just work out what I actually want to be on the outside faces. This poplar I'm working with is rather bland, but there is still probably an orientation which will make this look best. Now, for this one, it looks a little bit grey on that face. However, there is kind of a weird discoloration there, so I'll probably make this the outside edge. And as for the bottom, doesn't matter too much. What I can see is the grain is kind of going off at an angle like this, and one of the sides is likely to do the same, I reckon. There you go. So that side is kind of going down, that's going down. That'll make that quite a nice match up on one corner. Let's go to the next. That's kind of sweeping down as well. So see if we can do the same on this final one. There you go. Something like that, I reckon. That'll look pretty good. So I've kind of got this cool grain flowing thing going on with all the components. So then with these, we'll put a face side on all of them. And then we'll flip them upright and make a small face edge as well. And then the other thing I'm going to do is number these corners so that I know that this one goes with this one and this one goes with this one and so on. Now, when you do this, I've seen a lot of people do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which is all very well, but it does kind of make it a bit confusing when gluing up because all of a sudden you've got 8 numbers to work with. What I would advise doing here is simply just doing 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and then 4 is obviously going to be matching up with this one afterwards. Trust me, I've seen a lot of people make boxes and having the numbers going from 1 to 8, somehow, even for me, when I'm trying to help them assemble it, it does make it a bit more confusing than it should be. Going from 1 to 4 is so much easier. I'd advise doing that. And so now I've got a simple system that allows me to quickly put the box together without too much messing around, which is going to be really helpful when it comes to gluing this up later on. So now I need to start shooting these components to size using a big old thing called a shooting board. Now this is a very over-engineered version and is something that I made as a project on YouTube. I'll put a link down in the description below so you can look at that. But a shooting board really doesn't have to be this complicated. I have already filmed a video on how to make a very rudimentary shooting board using 2 clamps and 2 scrap pieces of timber and obviously a square to check that it's square. There's also a link to that in the description. Now, when shooting the ends of your components square on a shooting board, what you need to ensure is that you've always got the face edge of this component pressed up against the fence. So if we're doing corner number 1 here, for example, we've got it like that. If we want to do this side, we flip it over like that and then push it against the fence like this. Therefore, the face edge is still there. The reason we do this is if this edge is out of parallel to this edge here, let's say it's going off at an angle like this, if you were to plane number 1 square to this and then you flip it round, and therefore this would be kinked off at an angle like that because this side wouldn't be parallel to the bottom face, then side 2 is going to be made out of square to number 1 or out of square to the bottom of the box, sorry. So always make sure face edge is pressed against it like that, flip it over on end, pressed against it like that, but this time the markings are underneath. So I'm going to start by getting one side of all the components shot square to the face edge, and then once I've done that, we'll start cutting them to length. So we'll go for a nice fine cut here. Make sure to start the plane at 0 and then slowly bring it out so that we get a nice fine cut from this. A few passes is all we need in order to get some perfectly square, clean end grain. So we'll put that one aside and then focus on another component. And so now with that end shot square and it's nice and clean, I'm then going to put the final measurement onto this component. So that is now 1 millimeter oversized. We took 1 millimeter off on the shooting board. I'm just going to put a tiny knife mark right there. Very, very small. I don't need to square it across the entire thing because the shooting board will do that for me. So because that mark is now on the underside, because I've flipped it over in order to put the face edge against the fence, I'm just going to have to keep checking it momentarily, or I could just mark it on the other side of the component, but you know, I like to make life difficult. And then we'll do exactly the same on the longer component. This time I'll do it on the back so I can actually see where that mark is while I'm planing. Okay, so we now have one short component and one long component shot to length, and I'm happy that those are, oh, that's the wrong one. I'm happy that these are at the correct dimensions and they're all lovely and clean and everything. What I don't want to do at this point is repeat the same process on the other two pieces, because let's say, for example, I accidentally made this one 0.5 of a millimeter too short, and then I made this one 0.5 of a millimeter too long, which is entirely possible to do without really noticing. Then that's obviously going to be a millimeter difference when you put the two together. So what I'm going to do with the second long component and the second short component, I'm going to shoot these while referencing it against the other component to make sure that they finish at the exact same length. I'm not going to hold them together while I'm shooting them. I'm just going to take a bit off the end of this, check it, take a bit more, and then keep checking it as I go. What I will do is just give myself a little pencil guideline, perhaps, not much. It's not going to be like accurate or anything. It just gives me a sort of gauge as to where I'm at. So I'll find that face edge, which is there, and then start shooting this down to length. So I'm just approaching the line now. There you go, I've hit it. So let's check it against this component. Maybe just use the flat sole of the plane as my reference. Feel the other side, definitely a bit of a step there still. So keep going. And this is one of those points where it's incredibly easy to say, that'll do. And you just kind of finish it. You know, that feels really close. That's probably about, I don't know, not even half a millimeter off. But just by doing one, maybe even that, that'll probably be enough, to be honest. By taking off small amounts with the shooting plane, need one more. And look at that, two took it too far. So I'll just go back to the other one. So then just do that final checking. I've got my face sides up like this. So I'll just put those against the sole of the plane because that's a nice flat surface. There you go. I can feel that end and there's no comprehensible step or anything there. It's just completely flat. So that's fine. Those ones are sorted. Same again on the shorter ones. I'll just lay them on top of one another, push them against the sole of the plane. Rough mark there to start working to. Make sure the face edge is against the fence. And then check it. Right, and there you go. That is all the components cut and shot to size and ready for the next stage. So just to reiterate what you've learned in this lesson, you have learned the importance of face sides and face edges in order to prevent you from making an S-shaped box. You've also learned how to number the components so it's far easier to assemble later on when you've got the added stress of glue being applied to it. And obviously you've learned how to cut and shoot things to size for superior accuracy. So you are now ready to move on to the next lesson. You can do so by clicking the link below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel by clicking that big round button there to the left-hand side of this video, and follow me on social media if you haven't already. See you in the next lesson.